Hey, what's up? This is Will with Abysmal Hems, and I've got Dan Thomson with me from Lowheaven. They have a new album, Ritual Decay, coming out August 29th, and we're here to talk about that. Dan, so with the new album, I like the fact that it's both heavy and melodic, and it's kind of falling into like you guys aren't like cookie cutter doing like a screamo thing, but at the same time you're not doing like straight up sludge. But I could hear like influences from like Neurosis mixed in with hardcore too. So tell me about where you guys are coming from musically.
It's an interesting one because we all do come from different spots. And I think while we were kind of like feeling each other out and seeing where this band was going to go, we were all kind of sharing stuff with each other that maybe the other ones weren't super familiar with. So, like you bringing up Neurosis, for example, like Neurosis, Cave In, Converge, all those guys, like that's my zone of the world. Mikey, not so much when we first were able to get together. So I think that that is really part of why we're a little eclectic, a little all over the place, but it still kind of melds together. Is you've got with the writing process three different people, but now with the overall band, like five different people coming from different spots, but all wanting things to be heavy in the way that they hear them.
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely hear that. My favorite song so far is Fighter Valley. So where were you guys coming from? It's a little different. It's one of the album's more melodic songs. What is it about? And where were you guys coming from when you wrote that?
That's actually a funny one because I think like when I kind of look back at that song specifically, it's a little bit interesting because it started very different. Like that opening riff of that song actually was a bridge when we first wrote the song together. And it got kind of kicked around a little bit. Stuff kind of moved around as we were like, you demo, you re-demo, you figured shit out. And then that one kind of sat on the back burner for a little bit while we kind of worked on some other stuff. And it was almost when we revisited it and kind of re-explored it that we're like, oh, we actually know where we should be going with this song. But it was like after writing Mercy Death and after writing Cancer Sleep and after writing Of Us Away, where we came back to visit that and go like, oh, there's a different way we could do this. But it's funny that you bring that up because I kind of had to go through some of our old demos for a different thing that's going on right now. And the first demo of that song is so different and honestly pretty terrible. Uh, but yeah, it's cool to like revisit that stuff, and especially for me, like when we get ready to prep that song and we get ready for all of those things, it's fun to think about like, oh, this opening riff was something else before, and this part was over here. But I'm really happy with where it ended up, and it also has like a very good spot within the track list of like this is where it should be.
Yeah, I can hear that because the front end of the album is really dark and kind of apocalyptic, and then the melodic stuff starts coming in, which I think is a really great balance. Um, so what's the Canadian scene like as far as the bands that you guys are playing with, and do you find yourself getting booked playing with more like hardcore bands or
It's a little bit all over the place. Very truthfully, we've played Toronto probably three, maybe four times since the band has been out. First time was with a band called Spotlights, which I think definitely makes sense.
Mhm.
Last time was with The World is a Beautiful Place. So we do kind of get a little bit of mixture between those things. I think probably the one comparison is like loud guitars are always involved. But we kind of like that. We like that we can tour with hardcore bands and then go out with like, space rock bands and then go out with like borderline post rock. And like we can fit into all of these different spots while still maintaining the truth of what Low Heaven is trying to be. Toronto itself, though, is extremely exciting just to live in as a music fan, let alone being a musician. There's so many good bands in so many different areas in so many worlds that like you don't really have to like strike out too far to find something new that you didn't know. And there's a lot of like bands. I don't want to say younger bands because kind of age doesn't matter. But like there's a lot of bands that seem to be popping up in the last little while that are like I don't want to say vintage chops, but that's kind of what I mean. Like they're coming in and it's reminiscent of different eras as we were growing up, and I'm really digging that. but they have their own version of it because they didn't grow with it. They're kind of just creating it naturally, so
Right,
it's
right,
really
right.
cool. It's really exciting to be around.
Yeah, there's a band. I think they're from. They're called Freeze the Fall. They're like three. They're a power trio. They're young kids, super young kids. And I talked to them, and they were like, they're probably 18, 19. And they were like, well, our dad got us into Rammstein. I was thinking, oh God, this is a whole totally different world.
It's kind of wild. Like, yeah, I mean, there was New Friends Fest just this past weekend, which is kind of like this crazy screamo fest. But they go out of their way to seemingly book some of the bands from around Canada, but especially like our little area, and give you like a sneak peek while they book other big stuff too. But there's a lot of like there's a band called Sundowner from here, who are like noise rock awesomeness. We try and rope them into shows whenever we can because they're just fun to watch. But there's a lot of stuff like going on in Toronto, a lot of things that I'm probably not even aware of, and that's what's exciting about it.
Right, right. Sure. So I was reading that you guys, when you were in the studio and recording the album, were like watching horror movies is kind of a inspiration. And one of them that was mentioned I thought was funny was Titan, which probably slipped under a lot of people's radar, but it was a totally crazy movie about a girl and a car, but
It's
kind
fucked.
of.
Yeah. Very truthfully, that was Brett, our producer. I think he kind of knew right away what we were going to need to stay bought in a little bit, because especially when you're spending a month at a recording studio, you can kind of like get out of the creative zone a little bit because it gets a little too everyday, same room, same thing. And he threw that on. I think we ended up actually watching it 3 times while we were there. But the first time he threw it on, I'm not kidding. We all kind of just stopped what we were doing for about a half hour and we're like, what the fuck is happening? And that was within like the first 4 or 5 days of being there. And from then on, I think we were all just like, oh no, we got to stay with this because this is fucking with us in the good way. And then from then it was like Cronenberg and like all this indie stuff and like because Brett is a movie freak. He's a music genius, but also he's got the movie brain too. So he'll be like, "Oh fuck, you got to watch this movie from 1986," and I don't even know what it was, and I finished it. And I'm like, I can't go to sleep now. Like that's fucked up. So, but that one especially, like, there's just like it sounds so dumb. It's so beautifully shot, but it's so like subjectually torturous that it's kind of tough to like let go of, but also you really just want to be like, no, 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 I can't do it. And that definitely brought tension into what we were doing.
Right, yeah. I mean, I could see, I remember when I was younger and smoked pot all the time, I would like put movies on and then just have music playing. And I think that that dichotomy, the visual versus the sonics, always work together. I mean, that's why MTV was so popular back when they played music, the visual aspect. So, what are some other things that that kind of inspire you guys aside from bands? There's like books that you're into, or
I think art in general just co-mingles, whether it's a painting or animation or novels or poetry or anything visual, anything that you listen to, any of this stuff. I think it all interacts and it's kind of just how you want to like take it in. As somebody who's very focused on words, the lyrics of this record, the lyrics of anything that we do, I'm very cognizant of. That is also stuff that I recognize in other places, whether it's watching a movie and kind of dialing into the dialogue and going like, this is unusual. This is whatever it is, or any kind of poetry that I've kind of gone through or listened to, or even just spoken word stuff. Like there's stuff to kind of gravitate towards, and I think you find your art and your people and your things by being open-minded to that. That's not to say that I don't want to watch like a slapstick dumb comedy movie, because sometimes you need joy in your life, but there's a lot of times where I find myself really attached to something, like a movie, say, that has the vibe of what I feel like our music is creating. I'll be honest, like most of my time is spent listening to music. I to a nauseating degree. But I look at everything, if I'm on a trip to New York and I'm going to an art gallery or something like that, like I'm taking that all in. It's all part of the experience. So I like to believe that that all flows into what's going on.
Cool. So, one thing that's very distinct is the way that the vocals are blended. I like that, it's not when the singing comes in, it's not the whole good cop, bad cop thing like Kill Switch Engage, but a very like organic thing. It's sometimes it reminds me, I don't know if you've ever heard of a band called Far.
I love Far. I'm
Yeah.
where can you see it? I don't know if you can see it. I have a Far tattoo.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, which is the vibe I got kind of from Fighter Valley a little bit, there at the beginning. Um, so when you went and recorded the vocals, did you do separate takes for the singing and separate takes for the harsher vocals? How did you track all those?
Well, it depends between me and Mikey, obviously, because Mikey's got kind of like the deeper, bigger, kind of like burly scream to him, whereas I'm more of like the higher stuff. It really depended on what was going on. There's some cuts in there where I ran pretty straight through, and there's times where like what I'm doing vocally from a singing point of view versus the screaming point of view, how I would do that live maybe doesn't translate super well into recorded music. So we were kind of experimenting the whole time. There's certain stuff that I feel like Amherst is a perfect example of that. Like a lot of that song was recorded in one shot, and then we would go back and record another whole shot sort of thing. So it wasn't being cut up and like pieced together like sometimes you can do. And I think that the emotion and the general just like dragging hell of that song kind of needed that performance. You know what I mean? Obviously, we went in and added additional vocals and harmonies or whatever else we needed to do, but that main vocal performance is pretty honest. Other times there's stuff that we wanted to achieve where we knew like, this part's got to be really big or this part's got to be really raw. And so that we kind of allowed that to dictate how we were going to do it. And then between me and Mikey, it was making sure that like parts work together or like this is a Mikey part. Let's make sure it's big for him or whatever it ends up being. But bar is a really good descriptor because I mean Jonah is famous for that kind of stuff, right? Of like just letting her go. And I think that there is something to be said about finding the right spots for that.
Right, sure. And one thing that strikes me, and all of my favorite singers are more about necessarily the emotion more than the pipes. Like I love Robert Smith, I love Morrissey, I love David Bowie. They're all like very emotional singers. So, what kind of headspace did you have to be in to get into some of the more inner conflict of the songs?
Truthfully, this wasn't much of a challenge as it's been in other bands that I've been in. The writing and recording of these songs took place in a very, very dark time for a lot of us, myself included. And so being able to draw from the emotion that was kind of bubbling wasn't tough. There are things that like I do as a vocalist that try to stay kind of in sort of things. I have this joking thing where I call it discipline, which is like a thing I picked up from a friend of mine, but it's like if you do 3 or 4 bad takes in a row, you got to punch yourself in the leg a couple of times to like get that thing going. It's supposed to be funny, but it really doesn't. So there's that sort of thing, but also it's just like when we were creating this, it's like for example, again, we talked about the lyrics. Like I was writing the lyrics in real time, and then I would stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning writing more lyrics, and then we'd go in to record a day or two later, some more vocals, and I would then re-edit again. So it wasn't like I was singing something that I had written 8 months prior. Like it was real time, real happening. And again, I think you can hear that in the catharsis of the record and the songs where it's like, it's not manufactured, it's legit.
Sure, sure. So when you went in, did you already have lyrics, or was it just I have some kind of Scooby-Doo lyrics that I'm gonna, you know, do the rough vocal takes with and then flesh it out later? How did all that come about?
I had a ton written, and then we got there, and I just started rewriting again. The way that I tend to record vocals is come up with the melody, come up with the song structure, and I do it very phonetically. So like whatever. And then I go in and generally speaking, kind of right around that. I usually have a subject in mind or something that I want to go with. With this, we did the same thing, but then going into the studio, I had like four or five different versions of lyrics for a lot of the songs. And then when we got there, it was like, no, this isn't right. And I had to dig in again. I was still borrowing stuff here and there. There's like little sections of things where I'm like, this is it. The rest of the song isn't there. And then I would write around that. But the majority of it was in the moment and or like edited over the moment or whatever that ends up being. And again, I think it is a byproduct of how everything else was going on. um Sometimes you can treat these types of situations as very lighthearted, and we weren't. And so a lot of that sped off of itself, and I think that that's why it kind of worked out that way. Because again, usually if everything was perfect, I would be a little bit more prepared. But yeah, we did it the way that we needed to.
And I think it works out because it doesn't come across as like contrived or anything like that. It's just a very natural flow. And there's a lot musically, you guys have a lot of sounds and almost a lot of chaos. Sometimes it kind of reminds me of Coalesce a little bit with the way some of the layers hit. So yeah, it's very interesting and not sticking with a formula, which I appreciate because I mean, so far this year, I was checking, I've already reviewed like 370 albums. So I
Wow.
hear a lot of formula.
Yeah.
Particularly, unfortunately, a lot of it comes on death metal days. But, um, yeah, I like that. So what would you say some of your influences are that maybe are stand outside of what everybody else is into in your band?
I mean, like I kind of touched on before, my tastes are a little bit older. Cave In, Neurosis Converge. One that always throws people really off is I love the band the 1975. Um, and it's not only just because it's like really good pop music, but also they're not scared to do fucking anything. And the way that they kind of put some stuff together, like they've got really, really pop songs that when you look at like the words of it, it's about a fucking school shooting or like something kind of, you know what I mean? And so I draw inspiration from that solely because like when it applies to heavy music is just almost as a reminder to be like do whatever you want. If you want to try something that's different, fucking go for it. um there's other stuff. I mean, we're talking about far, like I love most of what Jonah's ever been in, and that's all over the map, whether it's One Line Drawing or Gratitude or any of those things. It's hard not to take a lot of inspiration from someone who emits so much emotion every time they do everything. um but it kind of goes all over the map. Like I grew up a Nirvana fan. That's hard to ignore. Especially speaking of the other guys too, like they grew up in other worlds of heavy stuff. So sometimes they're introducing me to things where I'm like, fuck, I've never heard this before. Um, but I think a lot of it has to do, a lot of our attraction to things has to do with the emotion or the release of emotion that goes along with that. And I think that that's probably more important than like a genre definition or something that goes along with that sort of thing.
Right. And it's with the 1975, I think that one thing I like about them and also like about Taylor Swift, and I would say churches would get thrown in there, is these are pop acts with not an assembly line of songwriters and
Yeah.
producers. You pull up most pop albums and they have freaking 20 producers and 34 songwriters on an album. And it's hard for me to take that seriously. It's like I sound like I all of a sudden get old and want to shake a cane and be like, Pink Floyd just had one producer and three engineers. Uh, but
But I think you're touching on it. Like there's an honesty and
yeah,
there's like an earnesty. That's not the right word, but there's something to it where it started at one source and finished at one source or two sources. And I think that there's something about that that stands out. Like, I mean, that's the argument for Green Day, right? Like it's been the same three guys writing songs for infinity amount of years, and they just know how to do it. Imagine dropping eight more people into that. You wouldn't get Green Day anymore.
right,
So
right.
I get what you mean. There's something that's real about something that's in essence so consumable, but there's extra to that.
Right, the difference between art and product, you know.
The commodity side, yeah.
Exactly. And I think, for all the good that like MySpace did, it leveled the playing fields and took record labels to a more manageable level to where they weren't necessarily gatekeepers anymore. Um, and got kind of, the DIY thing back, not to the level of like an Ian McKay, but think about like a band like Converge. They do everything in-house with Death Wish, you
Oh
know.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And so
I mean,
there's
that's the dream, right?
right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's less hoops to jump through. So I mean, you guys definitely have that kind of creative freedom, and I think that it shows on this album. Um, what would you say? I know that you guys said that you were going through dark times. Are there any overlaying themes on the album?
I think a fair amount of it is kind of introspective in a sense. There's definitely a overlying mask of like dealing with failure in probably a negative way. Um, there's always kind of an underhanded side to anything that I do, to anything that Mikey or Alex or Pat or any of us do, that's got a bit of a anti-religious tone to it. So there's always kind of a secondary feature there because like five of us as a group, I don't fucking understand it, let alone all the fucking madness that comes from that sort of stuff. So that's always going to filter its way into there, whether it's through our music or our merchandise or whatever it is. But the overarching theme is failure. The overarching theme is, falling apart and kind of the toll that takes on you on yourself when you know that it was you, you know. Now that all being said, everybody's okay. But that was a lot of what was going on there, and a lot of the kind of weight behind the creation of a lot of that stuff. So it's really hard to like try and mask that. And I could make up a whole bunch of bullshit, but that's like the real answer is just like everything was failing, everything was falling apart. And I think that everybody had a slightly different version of that for a couple of years. So yeah.
Right, right, because all this was done pretty much in the COVID years.
Yeah, and COVID in Canada was very different than COVID in the States we've experienced in the last, especially doing interviews with people. Like the amount that we were shut down comparatively to the US is pretty astronomical. Like I can't even tell you what happened in 2020, but we were also still locked down in chunks of fucking 2021 too, whereas you guys kind of seemed like you tried to go back to normal. I don't know. Like it's
Oh,
wild.
I'm in Florida, so people were drunk out on the beach. It was
Like
the Wild West.
we had some weird stuff like I mean not like that, but my favorite was just seeing the ways that people would like kind of move around the mask mandate and some of the dumb shit that they would do, which I mean obviously that's going to happen in the States too, but it was just so like I live in the east end of the city. The jobs that I work, I know my clients because they live around me. So then seeing people that I've been seeing for years all of a sudden go, "Oh, you're a bad person. Like you're a bad dude," you know? And it was easy to identify from that. That was weird. But then I compare it to what you guys were doing, and it's like, "Oh, we took 2 weeks off. That's good enough." You know, like
Yeah, it was very dystopian, you know.
that's a good word. That's a
I
really good
I
word.
thought if this is the end of the world, it's going to be very disappointing. I was hoping for zombies, and now I got this. But
Or even just like everybody gets a pineapple before it starts. Like, give us something, you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
exactly. It was just a weird thing. So one thing that, and I know you guys, music is dark, and I love dark music is kind of my thing. Whether it's metal or anything, and I think that darkness creates a heavier feeling than just turning in and cranking up. But these days you can get a modeling amp and get the carcass guitar sound. That doesn't necessarily make it heavy if you're in like if you just came from vacation Bible school and now
Yeah.
you're playing Carcass.
Yeah.
Um, you know. So what kind of dark music are you into that is outside of maybe traditional hardcore or I guess and some I would say some darker bands like Bauhaus and The Cure could be punk. So we'll say not necessarily outside of punk, but what type of stuff like that are you into?
Well, I mean, Nine Inch Nails right away. Especially before Trent Reznor figured out he could be happy. I like that era of when he was like, "No, I am sad. That's who I am." So Nine Inch Nails is definitely up there. Um, I obviously kind of grew up in the same zone that you did. I think we're kind of picking up on that a little bit too. So there was a wide spread of that kind of stuff. I mean, Robert Smith is a perfect example. I mean, like we're talking about heavy without being heavy. That's probably the priest of that, like the guy that knows how to do that best. But I think during this time, not so much music as a direct influence, but more cinema, as we were kind of talking before, is just because I had more time to dive into that sort of
Mhm.
stuff. And music slowed down during this time. Like there were some records that came out. Don't get me wrong. There was like like Deftones had a record come out, and a few other bands during that time. Like I think Blood Moon came out during that around that
Mhm.
time. I might have that off a little bit, but there was so much time to sit and watch movies and watch TV shows. Like as dumb as it sounds, I don't know if you watched Ozark. That show's fucking
Mhm.
dark. And like that's when I watched through Ozark, was all through that area. And then we watched the final, I think we watched the final season in the studio. But that kind of falls into it between that. If we're talking specifically music, I mean Elliott Smith is a good one. It's kind of hard to differentiate between that. I'm a huge fan of Caspian, and Dust and Disquiet as a record, in my opinion, is a pretty dark feeling record. There's a couple of like resolving songs on there, but that record to me is a very dark, very like what feels like kind of falling off a cliff a little bit. And so that one is definitely something I would deal really heavily with. But also just diving into bands that I've always liked discography. You know, I got really into Soundgarden during 2020, and that's a sneaky dark one. You know, I
Mhm.
mean, we all know Chris Cornell now and everything that's gone on when he died, but like when you kind of look back into that discography, there's a lot of like hints at things that now you pick up on because he's gone, you know?
Yeah.
So that's probably a good reference for that too, because the Soundgarden discography is pretty vast, but when you really start digging into it, it's like, oh no, like there's a lot of darkness here.
Yeah, they're one of those bands, kind of like I mean, The Cure falls into this. I'd say The Police would too, where if you just judge them by their radio songs, you don't really have a
You don't
good
get the full
picture.
story.
Because
Yeah.
you're talking like a song like Fourth of July, that one, they're tuned down to God knows what.
Yeah.
It's pretty brutal. You mentioned Deftones, and it's funny because I saw Bar and Deftones open up for Monster Magnet, and this had to be
Oh shit.
in the
Yeah.
90s,
Yeah.
because I think Water and Solutions hadn't even come out yet. Um, but would you say the Deftones are an influence on you guys?
In ways, yes. They're definitely one of the first bands we all like bonded around, and have continued to bond around because what I think is really funny is we all like different parts of the Deftones, you know. But one of the descriptors that we would get when we first released our EP and kind of that is like, oh, they're like Deftones, but they're not horny, which kind of makes me laugh. But Deftones have definitely been something that we all bond over and that we kind of like share the aspects of what we like. And what I found is just kind of like the longer and longer that the band has existed, the more we seem to bond over that band specifically.
Uh-huh.
That's not to say we don't bond over other stuff too, but that discography gets revisited a lot more than some other bands. Like, for example, like Tool is kind of a hot take in our band, and they've got a pretty vast discography, but I think we've gone through it a couple of times, whereas like we'll be in the van listening to Deftones and it can be an entire week of just listening to them, you know, and that just naturally happens. So it's also really, really hard to ignore any kind of influence they've had on heavy music across the board because they've
Right.
been a stalwart for almost my entire life. You know what I mean? Like you, some people, like you brought up the police, like you can have whatever opinion you want on the police, but you can't deny the impact that they've had. And like in heavy music, that's Deftones.
Hmm. For sure. And I think that they're kind of like those guys. I would say Radiohead would be another band like that
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of outlived the era that they came out in. You
Yeah.
know, when I knew Deftones, it was okay, these guys are new metal, they're wearing Adidas, they're rapping on a Korn album.
Yeah.
Um, but then they evolved out of that. And I think that that's one thing that I hear on this album is you definitely gave you guys room to grow. You know, you're not pigeonholed into one sound, and I think that that's the key. So, are you guys going to be planning on doing any touring for this album, or what's
Uh, we
the
leave we leave at the end of the month. We're doing a short little rip there. We have another run coming up in the fall that we haven't announced yet. But the complications with the US Canadian border have kind of wreaked havoc on us a little bit. Some stuff that we had in the works that we were really excited about just kind of fell apart because of, bands not coming into the States or being scared to come in or not wanting to leave the States to come into Canada for very honestly like valid reasons because I mean we're lucky to be the people that we are. We have all our paperwork done, we have all this stuff done, but I also can't imagine, traveling with someone, for example, who's trans and trying to cross the border, because that sounds like an absolute fucking nightmare, and it shouldn't be. It should be just as easy for everybody.
right?
So that's kind of impacted our year a little bit. We try and obviously stay positive and also recognize that we're very lucky to still have other offers and other things that are going on. But we're looking at, like, as far as our overall planning, like we're looking into 2026 right now. And we know that that's going to be busier than 2025 is going to be just based on looking at the calendar. But for the rest of 2025, we've got a couple of, like, we're doing a Toronto show for the first time in a little while, which will be fun. But we've got the northeast of the US at the end of August and September. We're doing some Midwest and some other stuff going into the fall. And we're definitely a band that like wants to be on tour. We're not scared to go on tour. We're not like worried about, oh, did 100 people show up to this show? No, only 40 did. Oh, nuts. Like we're like, hey, 5 people are here. Let's fucking go. Um, and so I know that it's just going to keep picking up and keep picking up, we obviously want to be as busy as possible. Hopefully people connect with the record enough that they also want us to be out there and be as busy as possible. And we'll take every opportunity we get to be out doing as much as we can.
Awesome. Well, we are about out of time, but hopefully you guys can make it down here to the States, sneak across while we're having a civil war or something like that. It'll be fun. Um, yes, and I think that with everything being as chaotic as it is, people need that escape.
I
After
agree.
COVID, people were ready for some type of connection, and I think that that's music is one thing where we can all kind of connect and definitely get into that. I'm going to put all the links to the album, you guys Bandcamp, in the description down here, so check these guys out. Thank you for being on, and we'll have to get you back sometime.
Thanks, Will. I appreciate it.